Hi, I'm Luke, and today we're going to go over how to hold your handstand, just like this. So, like I said, today we're going to talk about how to learn your handstand, and once you've learned it, hold it for a substantial amount of time. We're going to do that by learning it in 3 parts, which are going to be strength, technique, and balance. So hopefully after we run through these 3 steps and you have some time to practice them at home a little bit, you'll know how to do a handstand and you'll be able to hold it and show off to all your friends like, hey, now I can do a handstand. A handstand is obviously a cool skill and a really solid goal to work towards just in and of itself, but it's also a really good way to build into other skills. Once you learn a handstand, you kind of access a whole world of calisthenics skills that you can practice. You got things like handstand push-ups. You learn how to do a 1-arm handstand if you wanted to go super far with it. But a handstand is like the basic building block for all the other like really crazy stuff you can learn with like bodyweight training and calisthenics. Also, even if you're not looking to delve into like a whole bunch of calisthenic stuff, handstands are great for just building overall strength, working on push strength, and then muscular stability as well. If you do any kind of like pulling in your workouts, having a good handstand and just building up those stabilizer muscles that having balance provides, it's gonna be good for injury prevention and just make your upper body stronger and more athletic overall. Okay, so like I said, there are gonna be 3 steps to working towards a handstand. First thing that we're gonna work on is strength, because a handstand is gonna build strength by itself, but there is a certain amount of prerequisite strength that you need before you're gonna be able to just get up and hold a handstand. What we're gonna do first is go over 3 exercises that you can do to build that strength up before you actually start trying to just do a handstand.
Looks like you have like a walker.
I don't know what this thing is. So the first of the 3 exercises is gonna be an elevated pike hold. So essentially what you're gonna need is this exact box. No, you're gonna need any elevated surface that you can put your feet up on. That didn't work, hold on. You're gonna need any elevated surface that you can put your feet up on. The goal is gonna be to get your feet up and get your upper body into as much of a vertical hold, as much of a handstand hold as you can while your feet are still on the box. So you don't want to be as much in like a plank down here. You want to try and get your shoulders over your hands and then your hips as close to being over your shoulders as you can. Try to stack yourself over your hands in as close to a handstand position as you can be. Does it look like I'm in a handstand right now? Okay, so the second exercise we're going to go over is wall walks. So essentially we're getting into a little bit more of a handstand position here. What you're gonna do is start near a wall with your hands out in front of you. You're gonna start by walking your feet up the wall and then bringing your hands in as well. And you're gonna get up as close to the handstand as you can. If you can bring your hands all the way in, then that's great. Or just get them as close into the wall as you're able to, and then walk them back out until you can stand on the ground again. You can do this in reps and sets if you want. So you could do something like 3 sets of 5 wall walks coming up and down, and that's a good way to build into the handstand before you're actually holding it. And then the third exercise of the 3 is gonna be a simple handstand hold against a wall. As basic as that sounds, that's probably gonna be the best possible way to train for doing your handstand unassisted, because there's not really gonna be something more specific to holding a handstand than just doing a handstand. So we're gonna get into the form of the actual handstand hold in just a second here, but do try to pay attention when you're holding it even against a wall to keeping your body in as straight of a line as you can. So pretty much that means having your shoulders right above your hands, keeping your hips above your shoulders, and then you are leaning on a wall, so you're gonna be at like a bit of an angle, but keeping your, what do you call them? Your feet above your hips and staying in as straight of a line as you can. All right, so the second part of the 3 tips or the 3 sections of handstands we're gonna work on is technique. If you can complete those exercises and you work on those, you now probably have the requisite strength to hold a handstand, but the technique of it all is gonna be as important, if not more important, than just having the strength. So the first thing to focus on form-wise in your handstand when you're first starting is obviously gonna be where to put your hands. So you wanna have your hands about shoulder width apart, not too wide, not too close together. And then in terms of where you look, mostly I find it comfortable to kind of look at the point like right between your these fingers. What are these? Index fingers? Anyway, it's kind of like you're making a triangle with where your hands are and then where your eyes are. That way your head's not too far in and you're not like arching your neck back. That's just gonna make it a little bit harder to hold. Shoulder width apart and then eyes right between your fingers is probably gonna be one of the more comfortable positions to actually hold it. And another thing, you wanna try to do this whenever you're going into an actual handstand position, is keeping your arms locked out. You don't wanna have them bent because that's just gonna be a path to your arms getting tired and slowly collapsing onto your face. Extend your shoulders, as in you wanna be pushing away from yourself and trying to like push the earth away from you at all times, not sagging down into the handstand this way, because for one, it's less stable and it's a little bit of a more like injury inducing position. So you want to be like fully extended and pushing into that handstand all the time. If you start to sag down, then that's when you, well, I'm not going to tell you to come down. You can keep holding and fall, but that's when you probably want to come down. Next point about your handstand form, or the position you want your body in, is probably going to be the most important piece of the handstand overall, and that's going to be keeping your body in a straight line and keeping your whole body stacked over your hands. Being stacked basically means, you know Jenga? You know how like if you take the blocks out, it's not as stable? Bad analogy. Basically by being stacked, I mean you want to keep your hands planted on the ground. The next thing you want to focus on is keeping your elbows, is keeping your shoulders over your hands, and then focusing on keeping your hips over your shoulders and then your feet in line with your hips. So your body is a straight line all the way from your hands up to your feet. It's gonna make it, for one, physically easier to hold because you're kind of just like stacked and sitting on top of your hands, and two, balance-wise, it's gonna be a lot easier because you're not having to control a piece of your body that's falling off to the side and pull it back in. You're just all in one straight line over your hands. It's kind of like you wouldn't stand on your feet like, that's like a little harder. I don't know. Anyway. The biggest thing to focus on when you're trying to keep your handstand in a straight line is to avoid being arched one way or the other. The most common thing I think people do when they're working on just getting that form down is go into what I call like a banana position. What'll end up happening is people will have their hands on the ground and then their heels will kind of start to like arch over their head, and it might feel like it's a less physically intensive position. Like it might feel like it's kind of like easier to just be like limp and floppy that way, but it's definitely going to make it harder to hold. So what you want to focus on is keeping your core tight, and then you want to extend through your shoulders. So you don't want your shoulders to be closed at all. That means being kind of like here. You want to extend and push the ground away from you as much as you can. You want like your armpits open and fully extended, and then you want your core nice and tight, and make sure your heels are not going over your head and kind of like falling into that banana position. The other thing is kind of the same thing in the opposite direction, which I think is less common, but you might be doing it if you're already like really strong. If you do like weight training, or if you have any kind of like prior pushing strength going into learning the handstand, people will end up in sort of like a closed shoulder push-up position, and they're just using like strength to keep themselves vertical, and you don't want to do that either. So while keeping your core tight to avoid the banana, you also want to fully open up. That way you're not like in that like hunched over floating bulldog position. Okay, so the last of the 3 points we talked about at the beginning is balance. So finding that balance in the actual handstand hold itself. We just went over a bunch of things about your form. So if you have the form down in your handstand hold, you're probably already like a third of the way there to having the balance unassisted, or maybe even more than a third. The other 2/3 are gonna be your kick up and then your fingers. There are a couple ways to get up into your handstand. Obviously, if you've done a bunch of handstands or a bunch of push exercises before, you might be able to press into it, but I think the easiest way is gonna be a kick up. So to kick up into a handstand, you're gonna wanna start in like a lunge position. So you have probably your dominant leg out front. That's generally gonna be a little bit more comfortable, and that's the leg you're pushing off last. And then your back foot behind you. You wanna start with your arms straight overhead, and the idea is you wanna keep them straight the whole time. That way you're not starting with them bent and then having to like push up into the handstand. So your arms are straight, and you kind of lean forward over that front leg to plant your hands on the ground. And you want this foot to stay on the ground as long as possible while your back leg goes up. That way you're more stable as you're kicking up into it. And then this leg can kind of join your back leg at the top once you kick into the handstand. As you come forward, the biggest thing with kicking up into the handstand is just finding that right amount of power where you're not going over your hands and like falling through, or not coming up short and kind of just like kicking off the ground a bunch and then coming back down. And that's gonna be made a little bit easier by keeping that front foot on the ground for longer. That way you're almost kind of standing for as long as possible before you pop up. That's gonna make it easier to find like the right amount of pressure and to kick off with. The last part, and a much bigger part in finding the balance in that handstand than you would think, is gonna be your fingers. A handstand is like 90% finger. That might not be true, but it is really important where your fingers are and how you use them. So generally you wanna keep your fingers spread at least a little bit apart. You know, you don't want them close together. You're just gonna be less stable. And you're gonna be kind of digging your fingers into the ground like keys on a keyboard, or kind of like you're, more like you're trying to grab the ground. You'll find that doing a handstand is basically just a constant battle of almost trying to rotate onto your fingers and then your fingers pressing you back away from the ground into that handstand. So with all of these technique tips, I would recommend working on them by kicking up against a wall and then trying to push away from the wall and hold it without any wall assistance for as long as you can. If you fall back into the wall, that's okay. You can kind of just get yourself back in position and then kick off again and kind of just use that to try and work on those technique tips and find that balance. And eventually, if you kick off the wall enough times and get the feel for that technique, you'll be able to hold it for a sustained amount of time without your heels touching the wall. So in recap, a few exercises you can do to work on the strength for a handstand are your elevated pike, your wall walks, your wall holds. So the main things to focus on in terms of your technique or your form for your handstand are keeping your hands about shoulder width apart, keeping your whole body stacked over your hands, and avoiding that banana position, and keeping your core tight to prevent that. So things to work on to find that balance in your handstand are that kick up and finding the right amount of force to get into the handstand, and then focusing on digging those fingers into the ground and trying to grab the ground while you're holding it. So real quick, before we get to the end of the video, I want to talk about gear you can use to work on your handstands. You don't really need anything. I mean, a handstand is kind of like an exercise that doesn't require any equipment, which is why it's cool. But there are a couple things you could get if you wanted to that might help you out a little bit. One of those is wrist wraps, like these. Essentially, these go around your wrists if you're working handstands a whole bunch, especially if you're just starting out and you don't have like a bunch of wrist stability yet, and you're getting any kind of wrist pain. You can wrap these around your wrists and it kind of helps support it. The only thing with that is you don't want to use them all the time and rely on them, because then you won't build up that wrist stability by yourself, and then it'll be a little bit harder to like hold it, or you might get pain in your wrists without wrist wraps. But they're good to use maybe once in a while. And then the other thing that you've seen me and Avery use a few times throughout the video are parallettes. So that's like these things. You can get smaller ones too that are portable and you could kind of like take around with you or take to the gym that look like this. I'll put a picture of them right here maybe. But basically those can be good kind of to like give your wrists a bit of a rest as well. They're in like a better position because you have a bit more control like with that bar. You have something to kind of hold on to and maneuver your body. But again, you don't need anything. That's why handstands are cool. It's a workout you can do anywhere and it hits like your entire upper body. Okay, so we broke it down into the 3 parts, which were your strength, your technique, and then your balance in the handstand. Once you master those 3 parts and put them together, you should have a solid handstand that you can hold for a sustainable amount of time. So this is the first video in what's hopefully gonna be a new series on the channel, kind of like instructional videos and like informational videos on how to do different body weight related exercises or skills. Handstands are kind of like a jumping off point, so depending on, depending on what I want to do really, maybe we'll do some more like advanced stuff too. If you know anybody else that needs to learn how to do a handstand just because they should, send them this video. Alright, thanks for watching. Hopefully I make another video and then I'll see you again in that one. Okay. Was that good?
Why are you just hanging?
I didn't want to go all the way down. Okay, well hold on. Sneak peek for the next video, rope climb technique. You ready? Boom.